Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of Indica Yoga's Yoga Insights. I'm Sophie French. This evening's session is going to be hosted by Harsha ji. Harsha ji is an author and a philosophy teacher based in Rishikesh who left behind his flourishing career as a software engineer in his mid-20s and became a dedicated spiritual seeker. He spent a decade of intense struggle doing spiritual practices and austerities in the raw conditions of the Himalayas, and also learned original Sanskrit scriptures of Indian philosophy in a traditional monastery. He currently teaches various systems of Indian philosophy and guides spiritual seekers and students who, of course, study with him on his online classes. So in today's session, Harsha ji is going to be talking about the Ashtavakra Gita. He has recently published a translation of this Gita. So the Ashtavakra Gita is also known as the Song of Ashtavakra. It is a Sanskrit scripture which has 298 verses spread across 20 chapters. These verses present a dialogue that took place between sage Ashtavakra and King Janaka in ancient times. In this modern day classic, Harsha ji has translated the verses of Ashtavakra Gita into English, and he's going to be talking to us today about the book as well as his spiritual practices and his spiritual journey. Harsha ji, would you please like to join the session?
Okay, I'm here. So can you
Namaste.
hear me?
Yes, Namaste Harsha ji. Thank you so much for joining Indica Yoga's Yoga Insights. We're very happy to have you here today.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. So I'm going to leave the session to you now, and I'll be back for the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I welcome everybody in the show, and I thank Indica Yoga and Sophie for having me here today. And today, I'll just share a few things of my own spiritual journey, as well as the book that I have written, and spirituality in general. And afterwards, you guys can ask me questions on spirituality, any question on spirituality. So we'll keep it open. I'm open to all questions. And I think Sophie has introduced me briefly, but if you want me to add few things to it, then I would say I was previously a software engineer, and in my mid-20s, I came across a book from Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Path of Knowledge Towards Self-Realization. And that book it ignited a certain spark in me about spirituality. Before that, I was least bothered about spirituality and religion and all this stuff. I used to consider it as some kind of orthodoxy, and I was a totally different person before that. I was a typical Mumbai teenager before that. But this book changed the whole perspective. It changed my standpoint towards of looking towards God and looking towards soul. And although this book gave me 100 reasons why I should become a dedicated spiritual seeker, and why I should renounce my day job and my family in order to seek moksha, liberation. But the entire know-how of the whole spirituality did not come to me from this book. And we can't expect that know-how will come to us from random material. That know-how has to come to us through certain evidence. And that's where spiritual scriptures play a great deal of role, because those spiritual scriptures, they are like science of spirituality. They are the evidence of spirituality. So we have to understand spirituality through the scriptures, through the spiritual scriptures, through the philosophy scriptures, right? Even if you are doing a certain practice, spiritual practice, then before you jump into practice, you must be clear about the metaphysics of the philosophy on which that practice is based, that methodology is based. Okay, but of course, as a young seeker, I had no idea of all of this. Plus, as you know, that in India, usually our mind remain dominated by mythological stories. So rather than looking at spirituality in a very practical and pragmatic way and in a very scientific way, usually we tend to get inclined towards stories, and usually like to carry certain imagination about the spirituality. So I was also a typical seeker in the beginning who was getting carried away with spiritual stories. But with some good fortunes, I happened to come across the spiritual philosophies, and then I learned them in a traditional monastery. And then I got all my answers, and I got a tremendous sense of fulfillment that shall stay with me forever. So then I decided that I must transmit this knowledge to other people also, this evidence-based scientific knowledge of spirituality to other people also. And therefore, I decided that I will teach the spiritual scriptures, the philosophy scriptures, of course, using the modern technology and modern means, but keeping the essence of the traditional studies intact, because you don't want to be compromising with the evidence, right? You cannot play around or fiddle around too much with the evidence. So you have to keep the sanctity of the evidence intact. And mind you, knowledge only comes through evidence. Knowledge doesn't come through stories or random material. Neither knowledge comes through fantasies. It has to come through evidence, right? So spiritual scriptures, these philosophy scriptures, they are like the evidence of spirituality. And of course, there are 9 types of evidences that are used in spirituality, right? And using those 9 types of evidences, various philosophies try to determine the nature of 3 factors: the nature of our soul, the nature of God or existence, and the nature of material world around it. And of course, the relationship between these 3 factors: the relationship of the soul with God, the relationship of God with the material world, the relationship of the soul with the material world, like that. And once you understand the nature of these 3 factors, the soul, the existence, or God as you may call it, and the material world. So with this know-how, you tend to understand what is enlightenment, what is spiritual realization, what is self-realization, and what is the way to liberation, and what is the ultimate goal of spirituality. Now it's very interesting that many people call themselves as spiritual seekers. And of course, each and every person, each and every being, I would say, has a spiritual seeker in him or her, no doubt. And at some point of time, that seeker surfaces. But the fundamental mistakes that all of us do, including me, I also did the same mistake in the beginning. The first thing that we should venture for is to find out the goal of spirituality. What is the goal of spirituality, right? If we say we are spiritual seeker or if we say there is a seeker in me, and of course there is a seeker in everyone, so it becomes pertinent for everyone to figure out what is the goal of spirituality. What is it that the spirituality has ultimately on offer for you, right? There should be absolute clarity about the objective. Now, in the beginning, as I said, a spark was ignited in me. The spiritual seeker in me was brought to surface by that book. But that book did not provide me with all the know-how and all the clarity about the goal of spirituality, right? Of course, that book did talk about things like liberation, moksha, but then is self-realization same as moksha? I mean, still many questions remain unanswered, like is self-realization same as moksha, right? Is liberation same as self-realization? Will the self-realization lead us to liberation? Will the samadhi of yoga or meditation practices bring us self-realization, and will it ultimately result into moksha? How does moksha comes? Does the God appear in front of us, as a form? How do the occult powers work? What do we make of the person who has occult powers? Can we take him for, as a God realized person? Can we take him as a guru? Right? So many questions still remain unanswered, and this is the case with all spiritual seekers in the beginning. But eventually, with some good fortunes, I did manage to study the philosophies in their original form from a traditional monastery in Himalayas also, and here in Rishikesh also. And then I got all my answers and a certain sense of fulfillment. So then I decided I'll disseminate the same knowledge to all spiritual seekers. So in my classes and elsewhere also, in my talks also, the first point that I begin with is the goal of spirituality. Okay, now if we ask people what is the goal of spirituality according to you, or what is even the meaning of the word spirituality, then they tell us so many different versions. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not so funny. But if I have to tell in one simple sentence the goal of spirituality, right, then I would say the goal of spirituality is to attain total and permanent freedom from all the suffering. And in fact, this total and permanent freedom itself is called moksha, liberation. Total and permanent freedom from suffering. That is called moksha or liberation. So that is the goal of spirituality. And only spirituality can bring you that moksha or can help you attain that liberation. Because the worldly means or even the religious means, the religious rituals, etc., they are not designed to bring you that total and permanent freedom. The worldly means and religious means or religious rituals, etc., they are designed to sort of provide you a temporary relief, but not a permanent relief. Right? It's only the spirituality that provides you the permanent relief in the form of moksha, by helping you attain that moksha. And if you want to attain that moksha, then you must have that self-realization. You must be absolutely enlightened about the nature of your soul. Right? We use this word soul, my soul. I am the soul. We use this word soul in so many different ways without having the required quality about the nature of our soul. Sometimes we confuse the soul for the mind. Sometimes we confuse it for the body. Sometimes we confuse it for the thoughts. Sometimes we confuse it for our imagination. Right? And as long as the confusion is there, the bondage will continue. Because this confusion itself is called ignorance in spiritual parlance. Right? This confusion itself is called ignorance in spiritual parlance. And knowledge removes this confusion. Knowledge brings the clarity. Right? And once knowledge brings the clarity, that clarity only gets turned into enlightenment, realization. And that way we can secure our liberation. And it's perfectly possible. It's not an impossible thing, because the self-realization doesn't turn you into some supernatural being or into some other species. Nothing of that sort. Self-realization means the clarity in your intellect about the nature of your own soul. That's it. The moment all the doubts vanish, that is the moment of self-realization. Once doubts are gone, that realization stays with you forever. And that realization only secures liberation, total and permanent freedom from suffering. That is the goal of spirituality. Okay. Of course, today I'm speaking all these things with a lot of authenticity and a lot of clarity. In the beginning, that was not the case. I tell you, I swear. I would have loved that, somebody like I would have found somebody like me today who would have told me the very goal of spirituality in one sentence. But it did not happen. I kept searching. The spark was there. I ended up renouncing my day job in Mumbai. I renounced my family. I came to Himalayas, and so many things happened. Right. And even after coming here, I stayed in many monasteries, went to gurus, and in each monastery I came across different versions of spirituality. What is spiritual? I used to ask them this question, but they used to give diplomatic answers, or they themselves were not so sure, right? So for example, one senior Swamiji once told me that Harsha, you just keep doing good things. When you keep doing good things, one O out of the good. Now good means G-O-O-D, the spelling of good, G-O-O-D. So if you keep on doing the good things continuously, one O from that good will fall, and what will remain will be the God, G-O-D, right? So for some time I tried that, and though maybe the O didn't fall, or maybe I was not satisfied, right? So this is how you tend to come across so many different versions of spirituality, its objective, its means and methods, but none of them can satisfy you unless you learn all of this scientifically from an evidence, right? So evidence is very crucial. So spirituality also has evidence in the form of spiritual scriptures. Of course, I know there are variety of philosophies and they have different versions of their metaphysics. But irrespective of that, as a seeker, we should be aware of them so that we can have clarity. And once we become aware of them, of course, we get into a position whereby we can decide what is the logical end of all this. If you ask me, then I would say the logical end of spirituality and the logical end of phenomenal life also is Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-dualism, which has been revealed by Upanishads, the impersonal revelations, right? And which has been amply elaborated upon by Adi Shankara in his commentary. Of course, before Adi Shankara also, there were great sages and other scholars who had elaborated non-dualism, Advaita. But Adi Shankara, of course, is the champion. Right? So through his commentary, the way he has interpreted that evidence, Upanishads. Right? So through that interpretation, I would say, is the logical end of spirituality and of phenomenal life also. That definitely brings enlightenment. Before that, of course, yoga philosophy is there. There is Raj Yoga, there is Hatha Yoga. They have their own scriptures. They have their own metaphysics also. And Raj Yoga's scripture is Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is based on Sankhya philosophy. Now, Sankhya has its own metaphysics, the Purusha Prakriti model, the 25 elements and all that, right? Plus these philosophies, they each use 2, 3, 4, 5 types of evidences, as I said, to determine the nature of our soul and the existence and the material. So using evidences and using certain fundamental principles, these philosophies try to determine the nature. And in that attempt, Advaita Vedanta happens to be the culmination of all that attempt. Advaita Vedanta becomes the logical end, and the culmination of that attempt to determine the nature of our soul, to figure out what is this soul, from where it has come, has it even come or not, where does it stay, how does it stay, for how long he stays there, or does he stay there eternally, is he same as existence or is he any different, is he a qualitative guy, is he a formless guy, etc, etc, etc. So I guess most of the participants who have joined here are definitely spiritually inclined people. So, with my own experience, I just have this one piece of advice, a friendly advice for all of you to understand the spiritual philosophies properly, right, in an authentic manner. Right? If you want an absolute clarity about the nature of your soul, about the nature of God, and about the nature of material world, and once you have the clarity, you would know what is the way to moksha, what is the way to achieve that ultimate goal of spirituality, which is total and permanent freedom from suffering. Right? Moksha is just a term which is used to indicate that total and permanent freedom from suffering. Moksha is not a mental state, it's not an experience, it's not an event, it's not a phenomenal event. Nothing changes in time and space when a certain subject attains moksha. Absolutely nothing changes, except the doubt from the intellect of that subject get removed about the nature of his soul. That's it. And removal of that doubt is neither an experiential process, nor it is an emotional process, nor it has anything to do with psychology, nor it has anything to do with physiology or other materials. It's just like earlier you were not sure about the nature of your soul. Now, with an evidence-based knowledge, you have become absolutely sure. What is your soul? That's it. That's all is required also. Nothing more is required to attain that ultimate spiritual objective. And as human beings, our priority should be to attain that ultimate spiritual objective. Because if we waste our human birth just like doing things which other animals do, then there is no point in getting born as human. Right? The best utilization of our human birth is to attain moksha, is to achieve that ultimate spiritual goal for our own sake, of course, for our own liberation, not for anyone else, not for the society. It's not a social cause, right? It's purely a personal cause, but it is the ultimate cause. Even the scriptures say so. So we should all strive for that in our own capacity. And for that, as I said, you have to, the best and the most reliable means are the spiritual philosophy scriptures. They are the evidence. They have all the science required to understand spirituality. So that has been my experience, and I disseminate that same knowledge which I got and which brought me sense of fulfillment. And of course, my spiritual journey begins from way, let's say 2004, 5, so it's been 16, 17 years. And I have had many different experiences, exposure to Himalayas, where so many things to talk about. But I will not bore you guys with my story, right? Because each of us can have his or her own story, but ultimately personal story doesn't matter. Ultimately, what matters is evidence-based knowledge. Each and every person is bound to have his or her story, whether he is a dedicated seeker or not. Each of us can write our own memoirs, right? In fact, I would encourage you to write your own memoir, right? You need not be a special person to write your memoirs. Everybody can write his own memoirs of his life or about a certain aspect of his life, right? So each of us can have our personal stories, but they don't matter ultimately, because the nature of our soul is impersonal. Soul is not a personality. Personality is a form which is an illusion. So whatever story that form has ultimately is a part of illusion. It might serve the purpose of entertainment, but it won't serve the purpose of liberation, right? So don't look for personal stories in spirituality. If you are serious about spirituality, look for evidence-based knowledge. That would be my piece of advice. And evidence-based knowledge will come from scriptures or spiritual philosophy, right? Of course, in our Indian or Hindu spiritual stream, we have 12 different spiritual philosophies. 6 of them are believers, 6 are non-believer, etc., etc., etc. You would all get to know about it, if you want to go into details of it. Today, I don't know how much time we have to get into details, but in your questions, you can ask me that, no problem. But I think this was my monologue, and recently I published a book on Ashtavakra Gita. I translated the verses of Ashtavakra Gita in English, and I wrote a commentary on each of the verses. And through the commentary, I tried to explain the perspective of non-dualism, Advaita, right? So if you want to see the cover, I have the book here. This is the book. So it's available on Amazon. And I think now I can take questions. Let us make it more interactive rather than me just having monologue. Let us make it interactive. So Sophie, you can come in and just see through the interaction.
Namaste. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey, and all the facts and information that you just shared, because that's what Indica Yoga is all about. We already had one question from S. Das Ji, who wanted to know how to contact you. We'll do that at the end of the session, Das Ji. We'll share Harsha Ji's details. Okay, we have Petra G asking us, well, she's saying, thank you so much for this interesting talk. Could you say you have attained self-realization? And her second question is, what are your thoughts about desires? So it's in 2 parts, her question.
Okay. So the answer to that question is, I do not know. And you might think that this is an evasive answer, right? But actually it is not an evasive answer, it's a technical answer. If anybody asks you, are you enlightened? Do you have self-realization? Right? Then it might be easy for you to say yes or no. But in either case, that answer won't be a technical answer if you just give it in terms of yes or no. Right? So if I am giving this answer, I do not know if I am enlightened or I am self-realized, then this is not an evasive answer, it's a technical answer, because in Kenopanishada, Shruti says, the Upanishada says, right? Avijñātam vijñānatam, vijñātam avijanati. The one who proclaims that he is enlightened, he actually may not be enlightened. Why? Because proclamation is possible when you have to understand things objectively. If I can say that I know what is a table, I can say I know what is a chair, because I can understand them objectively in terms of object. I, as the subject of that knowledge, can understand those objects in an objective manner. And if I have the know-how of certain objects, then as a subject I can very well proclaim that yes, I know those objects. But when it comes to the real self, when it comes to the real nature of our own being. Now, our own being, our real self, can never be objectified, because we cannot objectify it. So as a subject, it is not correct for us to say whether we know it or we don't know it. Technically, it is not possible to say so, right? And Shrut, and this is coming from Upanishad, right? I am not making it up. So as I said, this is not an evasive reply, it's a technical reply, right? And perhaps if you understand philosophy, my answer would make more sense to you, right? So that was the first part. And what was the second one? But of course, I would like one more thing to add to my answer in the for the first question. I am not seeking anymore, that's for sure. I have certain sense of fulfillment, and I don't think I am a seeker anymore. Perhaps I have got my answers. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Harsha ji. I think that was a very beautifully answered question, and also refreshing, in this world where everyone's proclaiming to be guru and this guru, and there's so much of these claims that people make today. Thank you for your honest answer. I'm
You
sure
know why I answered it that way, Sophie?
that. Yes.
Why I prefer to answer it technically instead of in terms of yes and no? Because in my journey, I have been a victim of that answer of yes and no to the same question. I also used to ask the same question to the people, to the gurus whom I used to go. One or two of them had answered yes, and I stayed with them and I followed them, and and then I figured out, well, something is wrong. Of course, I am not saying that you can judge anyone for realization. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that these scriptures very technically tell you that the answer to this question cannot be given in terms of yes and no. Neither we should judge anyone else, nor should we judge even ourselves for realization. If it is there, if doubts have vanished, then our subtle body will not seek another gross body. It is as simple as that. If the doubts are not there, then the purpose of the subtle body is over. So it will not seek another gross body. And our consciousness will just stay as consciousness. That is liberation. Right? Now you want me to predict it for myself, whether it will be the case or not. So the evidence doesn't allow me to predict. Right? And I don't, it's not an issue for me anymore. All I can say, from my subjective point of view, that I am not seeking it anymore. Perhaps I have got my answers. That's it.
Thank you so much for your honest answer. Again, Petra ji, I hope you appreciate that. And the second part of the question is, she is asking, what are your thoughts about desires? Could you elaborate on it? Could you elaborate on that?
See, desires are the impressions. Now, when as ignorant subjects, when we are interacting with the world around us, our subtle body tend to incur different impacts due to our interaction with the surrounding world. Now, each of that impact gets stored onto our subtle body as an impression. Right? And these impressions can surface either in terms of karmic factors, or these impressions can surface as desires. If these impressions get together, and if they produce three types of karmic results, jati, ayu, bhoga, then we call them karmic factors. But if these impressions pop up randomly, then we call them desires. So impressions can pop up randomly, or they can give their results in a more systematic way. If they give their results in a more systematic way, we call it karmic factors, karma. Or if they pop up randomly, we call them desires. Right? But in either case, they are the impressions stored on our subtle body. Those impressions have got stored because of our own ignorant interaction with the surrounding world. So as long as ignorance is there, your subtle body will end up incurring more and more impressions. And you will keep taking yourself as the subject of that interaction, that karma or those impressions. And as long as you take yourself like that, your subtle body will seek another gross body, because it would always see a purpose in the creation. It would always feel as if it has some unfinished agenda. Sorry.
Thank you, Petra ji. I hope that answers both your questions. Then we have a comment from Anjan Nandi ji, who's giving you thanks for the discourse and for how simply you've put it, on the simplistic way that you've elaborated on the spiritual thought process and understanding the way to liberate the soul. Thank you, Anjan ji, for your comment. Then we have Harish ji is asking, how is the Ashtavakra Gita different from other books or literature?
Yeah. So first of all, Upanishads, they are part of Vedas, right? Or let us say Patanjali Yoga Sutra, written by Patanjali Rishi. It's a scripture in itself. It's not part of Veda, but it's a scripture in itself, right? So similarly, Ashtavakra Gita is a scripture in itself, although it is not part of Vedas. Technically, this text of Ashtavakra Gita is not part of Vedas or any other scripture. It's an independent scripture, right? However, this is the most bold narration of the ultimate wisdom, I would say, right? So Ashtavakra's narration of the life of an enlightened person, or the understanding of an enlightened person. So Ashtavakra's narration of that understanding is the most bold and most uncompromising narration, right? It's a dialogue. It's a conversation between sage Ashtavakra and King Janaka. Janaka went to Ashtavakra and he sought the knowledge of liberation, right? That's from that point the Ashtavakra Gita begins. The first verse says that, Janaka goes to Ashtavakra and he asks Ashtavakra for knowledge of liberation. So from that point, this scripture begins, and then there are 298 verses in that conversation. So Ashtavakra gives knowledge to Janaka, then Janaka asks questions to Ashtavakra, again Ashtavakra gives knowledge, like that. So it's a beautiful dialogue, and it's an advanced text, no doubt. I mean, if you understand spiritual philosophies in their original way, in their original form, then it would be easy for you to understand Ashtavakra Gita. Okay? But even otherwise, as a random seeker or as a random reader also, if you read it, it has the capacity to provide you a tremendous solace. Because this wisdom, this narration of Ashtavakra definitely makes you aware of your real self in certain way. Okay, so it has the capacity to bring you that solace, even if you may not have full technical clarity. That is Ashtavakra, I would say.
Thank you, Harsha ji. Harish ji, I hope that answers your question. Then we have Ashish ji, who's asking us if you can give us a brief on the Ashtavakra Gita.
Okay, as I said, Ashtavakra was a sage in ancient India. Okay, and the name Ashtavakra, how he got the name Ashtavakra is an interesting story. Now, there was a sage named Kahola in ancient India. He was a scholarly sage, and he used to recite Vedic chants every morning, Vedic hymns. Now, once his wife was pregnant, she was carrying Ashtavakra in her womb, and Kahola was chanting Vedic hymns in the morning. Now, but he made some mistakes in his chanting. So from the womb itself, Ashtavakra tried to correct Kahola, his father, that you should not chant this like this, but it should be rather like this. Kahola did not take it lightly, as most fathers won't. Okay. So he cursed Ashtavakra that, boy, you are not even born and you are trying to correct me. So when you will get born, you will have 8 deformities in your body, or you will have a deformed body, right? He cursed his own son, and eventually Ashtavakra got born after a few months, and his body had 8 deformities. So that's why he got the name Ashtavakra, a person with 8 deformities in his body. But of course, later on in his life, Ashtavakra went on to become a great spiritual master, great spiritual teacher. And in those days, King Janaka was ruling India. And King Janaka was a spiritual seeker. He was a great thinker. He was a very pious king, but a great thinker also. So one night, Janaka had a nightmare. So he was sleeping on his royal bed, and he had a dream in which he saw that he has become a beggar who is without any food for 3 days, who is not getting any food for 3 consecutive days. So he saw himself as a hungry beggar in that dream. And when eventually he managed to get a little food in his bowl, a pair of bulls came near him fighting, and one of the bulls stubbed his bowl. Right? So whatever little food he has managed to got after 3 days, that also got wasted. So when he saw this nightmare, it shocked him, and then that dream was over, that nightmare was over, and Janaka opened his eyes, and as he opened his eyes, he saw himself sleeping on the royal bed with servants around, royal amenities around, in the form of that King Janaka. But because he was a great thinker, so immediately he started thinking, just now I saw myself as a beggar, right, who was facing some terrible encounters, and now I am seeing myself as a king, right? And this looks like a completely different world than what I saw in the dream. So who am I? Am I this King Janaka? I mean, what is the nature of my real self? Right? Is my real self this King Janaka, or was my real self that beggar? Is this world in the waking state a reality, or is that world in the dream a reality? Which one of the two phenomena is more real, and why? So he had all these questions about the nature of real self and about the reality of phenomena, right? So next day morning, he called his scholarly ministers and all other pandits from the town, and he put them these questions, that what is the nature of real self? What is the reality of myself? Means, what is the nature of the soul, basically? What is our soul, right? And is this phenomena reality, this waking state phenomenon, or is it just another dream? So he put forward all that question. So Pandits, they debated amongst themselves. They tried to answer Janaka's questions, but none of them were able to convince him. Then entered Ashtavakra, and when he entered the courtroom, the other people started laughing. Right? Hey, who is this funny fellow who has these deformities in his body? And he was fairly young at that time. He was in his teens perhaps, but he still entered. And then when Janaka asked him the same question, Ashtavakra told him that neither this waking state form of the king is your real self, nor the form of that beggar is your real self, nor this waking state world around you is a real phenomena, nor that dream world was a real phenomenon. Because reality has to be that existence which cannot be displaced or replaced by any other form or by any other phenomenon. Reality should remain as it is, no matter what. And there is one existence which actually stays as it is, no matter what. And that existence is called Brahman, which is formless and unqualitative existence, which is all-pervasive, which is an omnipresent reality. It exists on its own. And that Brahman is our real self. Right? And that Brahman only is the existential foundation of the phenomena also, of the phenomena of waking state world as well as of the phenomena of dream. And you are that Brahman. So you are not the form, but you are a formless existence. Like that. So that's how he answered Janaka. And then from there, Janaka became disciple of Ashtavakra. And then One day Janaka had gone to Ashtavakra's kuti, hermitage, to seek more knowledge. So after their dialogue, after their meeting was over, Janaka started approaching his horse, royal carriage, and he was about to climb on his horse, but suddenly he turned around again and asked Ashtavakra, "Do you have any wisdom or any knowledge that can liberate me before I climb onto my horse?" So Ashtavakra said, "Yes, I have something for you." And then this dialogue took place between Ashtavakra and Janaka. So that dialogue is Ashtavakra.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Next, we have about 3 questions from S. Das Ji. I'll just address them one at a time. And also Petra Ji has said, thank you very much for the answer that you gave her. That was the first question. Thank you, Petra Ji. We're happy to help. S. Das Ji is asking, he's saying he has a lot of mental disturbances and regularly falling from spirituality. How can he make himself steady?
By understanding spiritual philosophies. Unless you have intellectual clarity, you cannot stick to it. Right? So the simplest thing is to understand spirituality scientifically, as I said, using evidence-based approach through a concrete evidence. So if you don't know spiritual philosophies, in fact, no person can claim that he doesn't know spiritual philosophy, but he's very well rooted in spirituality. That I don't think how many would be able to say that. So we are bound to fall away if we do not have intellectual clarity about it. So have that intellectual clarity through philosophies, then you will not fall away. Then the seeker from you will fall away. You will remain as it is. Right now you are falling with the seeker, right? But let the seeker fall, you should remain as it is. So that happens with clarity.
Thank you, Harsha Ji. His second question is it essential to know Sanskrit? He mainly depends on translation. And does this serve a purpose?
As a student, you may not know Sanskrit, but your teacher, if somebody is teaching you spiritual philosophies, original scriptures, then he must know Sanskrit. Your teacher must know Sanskrit. If you are not aware, it's fine, because the teacher can always translate it for you. That's how I do in my classes. So all of my students, not all of them know Sanskrit. In fact, very few of them actually are familiar with Sanskrit. Not even 10%, but they all get the point. They all understand the philosophy, because I can translate it for them when I teach. So teacher must know. If he's teaching Sanskrit scripture, obviously he should know Sanskrit. If student is not aware, it's okay, to understand the essence.
Thank you. The last question Dashji is asking is, if we are Atman, then why are we not able to grasp it? Why is it so difficult to realize?
Because you try to grasp it objectively as an object, just like you grasp all other objects. That approach is a problem. And of course, that is the only approach that our mind is aware of. But that approach doesn't work for self-realization. Self-realization comes through subjective understanding, through investigation into the nature of subject, not into investigation of objects. So if you carry out that inquiry in an objective manner, right, and if you believe that you are the subject who is trying to understand yourself objectively, then that will not happen. You are the self. So what happens actually, we try to look at our real self from the eyes of the subject, right? Whereas we are the real self. So we should try to look at the subject and the objects from the eyes of the real self. That shift in standpoint has to occur, and it occurs with intellectual clarity, as I said. Without that, it does not occur. Without that, it won't talk. There is no quick tip for it. There is no quick solution for it. You have to have that clarity about the nature of three things, as I said: the soul, the existence, and the material world. And you must know the relationship between these three. Then only you would be able to place yourself, in the shoes of the real self. And then from the point of view of real self, you would perceive the other two factors. But if you believe that you are a jiva, you are an individual subject, and if you try to catch or if you try to grasp the real self objectively, then that is just imagination on your part. So have the clarity, and then you will know what is the secret. Right? Then subjective realization will dawn on its own. Then in fact you will not be required to even do anything from your side. The clarity will bring enlightenment. That's it. As a subject, you can't do much about it. Neither you should try to do much about it. Just have clarity. And you are that.
Thank you, Harsha ji. I think the light, I'm sure you know the light is gone. It's okay. We can still see you and we can still hear you. So that's okay. We have three more. Ashish ji is saying many thanks. We have two more questions. One is from Harish ji. He is asking, can the Ashtavakra Gita give him actionable insights which he can use in his day-to-day life? Das ji is also saying thank you. Thank you very much. I'll let you take the question.
And Ashtavakra Gita will not give you any actionable agenda, because in fact it will cancel all of your, in fact it will cancel the notion from your intellect that you are the subject of actionable agenda. Right? Who told you that you are the subject of actionable agenda? It's your own assumption about yourself. So Ashtavakra Gita will make you realize that you are actually not the subject of the actionable agenda. Actionable agenda will take care of itself according to destined karma, according to prarabdha. But all the while you can be yourself without having to be the subject of prarabdha, without having to be subject of that agenda of karma. That is Ashtavakra Gita. So Ashtavakra Gita should be the, I have mentioned in this book actually. In my preface I have mentioned, or I think in author's note I have mentioned, that the takeaway of this book, you should let the takeaway of this book remain at the level of understanding. You should not try to implement it on the activity plane, because it's not possible to implement it on an activity plane. Because on an activity plane, you end up assuming yourself as the subject of activity, which you are not. That is not the nature of your real self. Your real self never becomes the subject of activity. Due to ignorance, you tend to take yourself as the subject of activity. Right? So Ashtavakra Gita is to remove that ignorance. So let the takeaway of Ashtavakra Gita be remain at the level of understanding, and the effect of that understanding will show its power wherever it is required to show. For example, in school we learn 2 + 2 = 4. Like once you realize the knowledge 2 + 2 = 4, once the clarity is there, then you don't need to implement it on a daily basis, in terms of activity or actionable agenda. But when you go to grocery shop, that knowledge takes its effect automatically, and it helps you when you go to grocery shop. So let the knowledge decide its own application instead of you as the subject trying to decide the application of the knowledge. That does not work when it comes to real self. It may work in our secular activities, but in spiritual understanding, that doesn't work. So you should surrender to the knowledge. That's the best way.
Thank you so much. We have last two questions, and I think we only have time for two more questions. Raghavan ji is asking, is there a method for contemplation?
Yes, actually, this question is coming from want of activity-based practice, right? So there is method of contemplation, but what would you contemplate upon? For that, you should have clarity. What is it that you want to contemplate upon, right? So before you begin contemplation, you must know the metaphysics of your soul, of God or existence, and of material world around you. Once you have the clarity about the metaphysics of it, then you would know how to contemplate and whether it is required or not, and who is going to contemplate. That also you will come to.
Thank you so much. Our next question is Ramakrishna ji is asking, what is sage Ashtavakra's opinion about infinity, time, and space?
Ashtavakra's opinion is that infinity, time, space, all these things are Maya, illusion. And you are the foundation of Maya. You are the existence who is a formless and unqualitative existence, right? Who has absolutely nothing to do with time, space, and other things. You are not even the subject of time, space phenomena. You can just exist as an omnipresent existence. That is your real self. Right? So, not just Ashtavakras, even Upanishads say the same thing. Right? The time space is a Maya.
Our last question, it's as Dasji again is asking, if you could please give a few suggestions about meditation and how to practice it daily.
As I said, unless you have clarity about these philosophies, unless you study Patanjali Yoga Sutra, I mean, I can tell you one or two things here, but I don't know how much they will help you instantly, unless you yourself have that clarity in your intellect. Unless you study Patanjali Yoga Sutra properly, I can tell you that, keep the photo of your guru or some deity in front of you, sit in a meditative posture, have an ambient lighting, something like that, and then you focus you put all your awareness into that form, into your object of meditation, and just keep your awareness there only, in that form only. I can verbally tell you the whole process of all Ashtanga Yoga and all Samadhi and everything, but will you be able to instantaneously apply it? So it doesn't happen that way. So first have clarity about what is meditation, what is the definition of meditation, right? For that you must know the metaphysics of your mind, how it operates, what different functions it has, right? And you must also know the connection of your mind with consciousness and how consciousness powers the mind. I mean, apparently, but how it powers, right? So what is the nature of that connection between mind and consciousness? What are the metaphysics of mind? Unless you have this clarity, you can think that you are doing meditation, but it would be like taking a false satisfaction. It won't give you concrete results in terms of enlightenment. And if you just want a little bit of mental peace, then I would say just chant some stotra few times of your Ishta Devata. And after that, keep the picture of that Ishta Devata in front of you and just try to focus on that form of that deity, and perhaps it will bring you some peace.
Thank you. We have a few more questions, but I don't know if we have the time. I mean, Harsha ji, it's up to you. Do you want to take these questions?
quick questions, maybe. Yes, I don't want
Okay.
to disappoint anyone. So.
Okay. Avijit Ji is asking actually two questions. What is the path you would suggest for a seeker who is beginning the journey, given what you have gone through? And the second part, how do we find out about the courses you're conducting? Avni Ji, we will at the end of the session be asking Harsha Ji for his details, so that you'll get. But first part of the question is what path do you suggest for a seeker who's beginning the journey?
Yeah, whether you are a novice seeker, whether you are advanced seeker, whichever type of seeker you, the path, the most authentic and guaranteed path is learn the spiritual philosophies from their original scriptures. Preferably in a traditional way, but if not in a traditional way, at least try to understand the original scriptures of the philosophies, spiritual philosophies, of course. Right? And in that also, particularly the Sankhya philosophy, the Patanjali Yoga Sutra or yoga philosophy as such, and Vedanta Upanishada, along with Shankaracharya's commentary, the non-dual perspective. This is the most authentic path, I would say. This will answer you all your questions.
Thank you. One last question from Harish Ji, then we'll stop taking questions, please, because it's, I'm sure Harsha Ji also has things to do, but thank you for being so patient today and answering all of the questions. Harish Ji is asking, are you saying that Bhakti Yoga and Raj Yoga are not the right pathways?
I didn't say anything of that sort. Did I say that? I said you understand Bhakti Yoga and Raj Yoga from their original scriptures. You understand the philosophy behind these terms, these techniques. Get clear about the metaphysics which is involved in these techniques. That's what I'm saying. Have the clarity of philosophy. Have the clarity of thought. That's what I'm saying. And if you want to know the authentic scriptures of Bhakti Yoga, then they are Narad Bhakti Sutras and Shandilya Bhakti Sutras. So you can refer to them, you can study them properly if you believe so.
Thank you so much. As Dasji is asking if you could conduct online classes, he actually does, Dasji, and that's what we're going to get into now. So thank you everyone for joining the session. If you have any more questions, you can please email them to us and we will forward them to Harsha Ji. But as far as this session is concerned, that was the last question we're taking. So Harsha Ji, since everyone is asking, can you please share your contact details with us so participants can know how to get in touch with you? We will also put up his details on our website. But can you just share? And Koti Ji, can you type this so everyone can see it in chat, please?
Okay, so the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, and the URL is www.ajatsrishti.com. AJAT, Ajata Srishti, SRISHTI.com.
I have put this, yes, and it's in the chat. So anyone who wants to get in touch with Harsha Ji and join his courses can do so through the platform. And yeah, I think Harsha Ji conducts weekly classes on philosophy. So those classes are the classes you can join. And thank you so much, Harsha Ji. Before we end the session, we just want to make a few announcements. As all of you know, let's start with next week's Yoga Insights. Okay, one poster, Koti Ji, can we? Okay, we have two events coming up. Next week's Yoga Insights, of course, is Growing Your Mind. This is another meditation session that is going to be held by the founder of Being Sattva in Bali, Subha Vaidyanathan Ji. If you're a regular follower of Yoga Insights, Subha Vaidyanathan Ji is also the person who just released the Seeds of Yoga album based on the Yoga Sutra. So that's our session for next week. Please join us. And as you know, we have the Darshana retreat coming up in Goa. This is from the 6th to the 12th of November. We're going to be working with Indica Yoga is collaborating with Alisha Nitalkar. She's a yoga teacher based in Goa. This is going to be a very exciting, fun and informative retreat. So please join us. You can register for the retreat at indicayoga.com. Thank you so much for those announcements, Koti Ji. Harsha ji, we can't see you. Are you there? Okay. Just before we end, any message or advice you'd like to give us before leaving?
No, I wish well for everyone. That's all I can say. Rest is, everybody's trading his own destiny karma. So not much you and me can do. I mean, as subjects, we don't have much choice. But anyway, I wish well for everyone, and I wish they all attain spiritual enlightenment and you know achieve the ultimate goal of human life, which is liberation.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful, heartfelt message. And just to remind all our participants, it's www.ajatsrishti.com. It's on the chat. Anyone who would like to take down his details. As Das Ji is saying, thanks and pranam for this fantastic evening. Thank you for joining us, Das Ji. So yes, Harsha ji, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much for your valuable time and your valuable inputs. We loved having you here with us, and I think our participants enjoyed this session too. It was so insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here, Sophie. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll see all of you next week for our next session of Yoga Insights. Have a beautiful weekend, everyone. Namaste.